What if the biggest ideas of our time didn't just come from labs or parliaments? What if they started in stories? Prepare to discover how the books and novels we've read for centuries have invisibly shaped modern science, economics, and even our politics. This is about uncovering the literary threads woven into the fabric of all modern thought. The Ghost in the Machine, Literature's Unseen Hand. We think of great ideas coming from labs, textbooks, or political speeches, but what if many of our biggest modern ideas were born somewhere else entirely, in old stories and novels? The surprising literary lineage. Think of a big revolutionary idea, like a scientific theory or a political movement. Now imagine tracing its roots back, not to a lab or a parliament, but to a novel. This isn't just imagination, it's history. Did you know that the idea of a world-changing robot revolt appeared in the 19th century novel Erewhon long before the word robotics existed? The haunting warnings in George Orwell's 1984 about surveillance and truth control were so accurate they gave us the language we still use today to talk about governments and technology. The powerful critique of racial injustice in Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird shaped the conscience of a generation and fueled the civil rights movement with its call for empathy. Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, which reads like a detective story about nature, didn't just warn about pesticides, it launched the modern environmental movement. Centuries ago, Plato's The Republic wasn't just philosophy, it was the first detailed blueprint for how a society could be structured, influencing political thought for millennia. Even a political call to action like Karl Marx's The Communist Manifesto uses the power of story and rhetoric to turn economic theory into a revolutionary narrative that changed the world. This isn't a coincidence, it's evidence. Writers, using the power of story, often build the mental models, the frameworks of thought, that later scientists, politicians, and activists simply fill with evidence and data. Setting the stage for discovery. Forget your high school English class. This isn't about memorizing themes or analyzing similes. This is about revealing literature's real power, its invisible hand in designing the concepts, fears, and frameworks that shape our world. We're about to connect the dots from old bookshelves to the very systems that run your life today. The Bard's Blueprint, Science and Philosophy. Literature has a hidden job, to serve as the first laboratory for the future. Long before a technology is invented, a story imagines its soul, its purpose, and its consequences. The responsibility of creation. Over 200 years ago, Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein. It wasn't just a monster story, it was a profound question. What happens when we create life, and what responsibility do we have to our creation? Today, as scientists edit genes with CRISPR and advance artificial intelligence, we are not asking a new question, we are having the exact same ethical debate Shelley started in a novel. Her story is the original blueprint for our modern discussions about bioethics, giving us the language and the moral framework to talk about playing God. Dystopias as instruction manuals. Stories like Orwell's 1984 with its telescreens and thought police, and Huxley's Brave New World with its mindless pleasure and social control weren't just predictions. Decades earlier, E.M. Forster's The Machine Stops imagined a world where humans live in isolated pods, communicating only through screens and worshipping a global technological system, a chillingly precise vision of social isolation, remote work, and our reliance on the internet. These works weren't forecasting the future, they were diagnosing the human problems that new technologies would one day exploit. They were warning labels. They used fiction to model how technology could be used for surveillance and how society could be manipulated through psychology. Today, this tradition is more urgent than ever. Modern authors continue to sound the alarm. In Margaret Atwood's Oryx and Crake, we see a chilling blueprint of corporate-controlled genetic engineering and ecological collapse. Kim Stanley Robinson's climate fiction, like The Ministry for the Future, doesn't just describe global warming, it models the political, economic, and personal crises it will create, serving as a survival guide for a planet in peril. Shows like Black Mirror act as modern-day parables. Inspired by classics like The Twilight Zone, this television series creates near-future worlds filled with believable technology to explore a chilling question. What happens when social media, artificial intelligence, and virtual reality twist our most basic human needs? Each episode is a self-contained thought experiment, examining how these tools can distort our relationships, our sense of self, and our very grip on reality. These stories are not entertainment alone. They are stress tests for the human soul, asking the critical question, how will our creations change us, and what must we protect before it's too late? From fantasy to foundation. Writers like Jules Verne imagined submarines and moon landings with his Voyages Extraordinaire series, blending adventure with scientific detail. H.G. Wells wrote about time machines and alien invasions, giving us the language of first contact and temporal paradox. Even later, a writer like Italo Calvino built entire invisible cities and cosmic novels not to predict gadgets, but to model new ways of thinking about information, knowledge, and perception itself. They didn't invent the engineering, but they did something more important. They invented the ambition. They planted the philosophical and imaginative seeds in the public mind. They made the ideas of space travel or artificial intelligence seem thrilling, terrifying, and possible. This collective dreaming is the vital first step that inspires real scientists and engineers to turn science fiction into science fact. Novel narratives, economic realities. Sometimes the most powerful economic arguments aren't made with charts and numbers. They're made with a story about a poor child asking for more food. Literature as social proof. When Charles Dickens wrote Oliver Twist and Hard Times, he wasn't just writing novels. He was using storytelling to expose the brutal human cost of 19th century life, the child labor, the crushing poverty, and the cold logic of unchecked factories. His work did more than sell books. It created social proof on a massive scale. By making readers feel the injustice, it gave the abstract idea of human suffering a face and a name. These stories became cultural evidence that built public support for new ideas like labor laws, child welfare protections, and the foundations of the modern social safety net. They argued for reform not with theory, but with unforgettable human experience. Future shock and fiction. In the 20th century, authors like J.G. Ballard took this a step further. In novels like High Rise and Crash, which explored corporate towers and consumerist dystopias, he dissected the psychological toll of a new life, one defined by sterile environments, technological saturation, and hyper-capitalist pressure. He was not alone. William Gibson in Neuromancer gave us cyberspace and painted the spiritual disconnection of a data-dominated future. Don DeLillo's White Noise captured the existential dread beneath Sunzi safety and media overload, and David Foster Wallace's Infinite Jest foresaw the distractions and addictions of an entertainment-saturated culture. Long before terms like burnout, digital fatigue, or affluenza entered common use, these authors were writing the emotional blueprint for modern life. They predicted how relentless economic and technological shifts wouldn't just change our banks or gadgets, but would reshape our very minds and spirits, giving us a vocabulary to name the peculiar anxieties of the contemporary world. Ink, Ideas, and Ideologies. Political Theory. Stories don't just reflect politics, they create the language of power and the imagination of change. The playbook for power. Think about a modern political strategy. Now consider that its roots might be 500 years old. Niccolò Machiavelli didn't write The Prince as a story, but its ruthless, real-world advice reads like a political thriller. It gave us the word Machiavellian. Similarly, Shakespeare's history plays are masterclasses in statecraft, how rulers gain power, keep it, or lose it through charisma, betrayal, and propaganda. Modern politicians shouldn't just study law and economics, they should study these characters to understand the timeless human drama of leadership, a drama first mapped out in literature. The Spark of Rebellion. Sometimes a single book is a match thrown into dry tinder. Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin didn't just criticize slavery, it made millions of readers feel its inhumanity, turning indifference into fiery abolitionist conviction. It said President Lincoln called Stowe the little woman who started this big war. Later, George Orwell's Animal Farm used a simple fable about animals to expose the lies and corruption of Soviet communism. It gave people a powerful, easy-to-understand story that made a complex ideology seem undeniably cruel and absurd. These books didn't just comment on movements, they directly fueled and shaped them. Myths that built nations. Long before a country has a constitution, it often has a national story. Epic poems like Beowulf or the Song of Roland or sagas of ancient heroes are more than entertainment. They forge a shared us. These stories create a founding myth, a tale of common origin, struggle, and values. They tell a people who they are, where they come from, and what they stand for. This shared imagination is the emotional and cultural bedrock upon which political unity and national identity are built. A flag is just a symbol. The story is what makes people willing to fight for it. Your reading list for tomorrow. This journey shows us that literature is not a dusty, separate subject. It is woven into the very fabric of our modern world. The future is being written now. The conversation we've uncovered isn't over. It's still happening. Every new novel, sci-fi movie, or powerful poem is a living experiment with tomorrow's ideas. So ask yourself, what will be the Frankenstein or 1984 of our time? What contemporary story right now is planting the seed for the next great scientific breakthrough, economic model, or political movement? Today's fiction is tomorrow's first draft of reality. A call to reread with new eyes. This means the classic books on your shelf hold more power than you knew. It's time to go back and read them again, but with new eyes. Look past the plot for the hidden architecture of ideas. When you read Brave New World, don't just see a dystopia, see a warning about behavioral science. When you read Dickens, don't just see a sad orphan, see a foundational argument for social welfare. Let's stop asking, what does this story mean, and start asking, what world did this story help to build?